Tape 1. Go. The island of Sodor is a small section of land just off the west of the United Kingdom, accessible by boat, air and famously rail. Sodor has had plenty of railways lay upon its grounds, each with their own individual story which will be archived in this recording. Where to begin? Ah yes, of course. In 1850, the people of Sodor demanded for a large-scale project to be considered by their government, to not only provide easier access to a large section of the island, but to also create a far more convenient way to travel to the mainland. Without many other options, the government formed the Sodor and Mainland Railway and mapped out a clear plan of development. They would begin at Suddery, create a mainland to Barrow and Furness, and also provide a stable connection to the town of Godred, and this was how things went, for about the first few months of 1861. A short line was laid from Balaise and Rolf's Castle, and to do this, they brought on Nielsen & Company box tank engines Kelsthorpe, Neil and Vera. Number 1, Kelsthorpe was the most hard-working, for they took the most pride in their work. When the railway further expanded in 1865, past Rolf's Castle and to the port of Kirk Ronan, they were always awake bright and early to get as much done for the day as possible. However, Kelsthorpe had one small vice: they were not fond of rest, which often caused them to break down. Number 2, Neil was strictly a goods engine, through no fault of his own. It was just that passengers didn't like the look of him. Women would turn in horror, babies would cry. Neil was, to put it politely, ugly. But he was alright with this, as he preferred the quiet trucks over the fussy coaches, and it even led to him making 2 new friends when their sistering railway, the Scarlett Railway, opened. Number 3, Vera was the passenger engine, taking short trains up and down the stretch. She was often a favourite among the Sudrick people, so it was a shame when she would be swapped out with Kelsthorpe every so often due to those aforementioned breakdowns. In 1874, when everything seemed to be on the rise, a 4th engine, a small terrier, was brought to help with construction called Richard. On his first day, when he hadn't even been repainted or given a number, he was tasked to help bring materials to Balaise Hill, where they were to bore through to form a tunnel. It was all going well, but it ultimately collapsed in and buried him. There was no saving him when they dug back through. The Sodor and mainland were very traditional, and they viewed engines as extensions of the people, and they did something that had never been recorded since. They buried him. From what I've heard, they plan to build one of those newfangled car parks above where he is now. What an ending. Richard was seen as a bit as a turning point for the company. Things just went from bad to worse. They attempted to build a bridge across the Walney Channel, but the bridge's plans weren't exactly infallible. The foundations were washed away, part of the spans were lost when the careless cranes dropped them into the channel, but they managed to recover. Everything was almost ready. They were just adding the finishing touches when a gale destroyed it. They did consider starting up again, but there were protests after the Tay Bridge disaster of 1879. This upset a collection of workers, including one of the managers, so they rebelled, shook the S&M for money, and formed their own company, the Kirk Ronan Company. Their public image was failing at this point, but there was a single proposal that they promised to fulfill to hopefully win back the public's approval. An interchange station at Kelsthorpe, which would serve engines on the Sodor Mainland Railway, and the engines who worked on the Kirk Ronan branch line, which had just been established. The construction was almost completed, and everything seemed to be going well. But one day, Vera lost control of a train of supplies, and headed straight for the construction site. Kelsthorpe jumped into action and derailed it on the bend before the station. The station, which hadn't been named yet, was named after Kelsthorpe, though unfortunately, not many people know this story, as they simply believe that the station was named after the town it served. This incident didn't help the public image. Well, yes, the accident had been prevented, but the runaway still happened. Funds were getting low, and in 1899, Kelsthorpe and Vera were sold away. Kelsthorpe, was sold to the Sodor Cement Works and trained a little traction engine until they finally gave out after being worked to the bone in 1901. Their boiler combusted and there was no going back. Vera, however, didn't get such a powerful end. She was sold off to the Kirk Ronan branch line, which scrapped her immediately. In 1901, bankruptcy came. Neil was then sold away to the Scarlaro Railway Company to take short trains to and from their line. In 1914, this proved to be getting impossible to manage, so he was stored away in the shed, where he is until present. Also in 1914, the Sodor and Mainland Railway merged with the other companies on the island, becoming part of the North Western Railway. Every single goal that they set out to do was completed in a faster and better manner. The Balaise Channel was successfully bored, and a bridge was built over the Warning Channel to connect to the mainland. In 1897, a select group of workers from the Sodor and Mainland Railway, including one of the managers, Manol Packard, had felt they had suffered enough. They decided to form their own company, the Kirk Ronan Company, and tricked the other members of the Sodor and Mainland into buying 2 more engines: Sean, an LSWR 0298 tank engine, and Marie, an LNWR large boomer. Once those 2 engines had arrived, the company forcefully split, taking whatever funds they could scrap together to create a petition for the people of Kirk Ronan and beyond to let them run the line. The community was honestly quite refreshed after promising better services and helped raise enough money for the stretch of track to be bought, and in 1880 they entirely established the Kirk Ronan Railway. However, their priorities immediately changed. While they promised better services, both passenger and freight related, they completely dropped passenger traffic from their manifesto, in favour of overhauling the dockyards to accommodate quite a lucrative contract indeed. Mitten Industries Munitions. With this deal struck, the line quickly became the Kirk Ronan Industrial Railway, closing any of the stations that the Sodor and Mainland had established and replacing them with halts and warehouses. This angered the public, but the managers didn't care, for the munitions contract was lucrative enough to guarantee no loss at all. Sean was the main shunter for the munitions harbour, being incredibly careful in his work and took much pride in it. If northern munitions on the island was requested, he would arrange the truck gently into a line from Marie to take up to the exchange station, where they'd be transferred to an engine that could get to the location needed, usually the Scarlaro Railway for a quarry blasting. Management from both the Sodor and Mainland and the Kirk Ronan Railway often had clashes, so the latter sneakily constructed a junction to connect with the main line, insisting that it would save costs. This did not go over too well, and the Sodor and Mainland wasted quite a large amount of money on tearing it back up, which just further added to their losses, though the Kirk Ronan managers didn't mind. This just meant the cost to get up to the Scarlaro Railway would once again hike up in price, meaning more profit. Marie was the larger engine on the line, and she was famously quite reliable and on time. She was often cited as a pleasure to be around, but questions soon began to swell when she would always turn up on time, no matter how late she left. Was she speeding? Well, no one could prove that she was. She never crashed, and she never caused an explosion. In the words of Bernard Packard, who cares? In 1894, they came into possession of a small tank engine, Candle Queen, who was tasked with delivering fuel trains to and from the munitions harbour. When the North Western Railway was formed, the Kirk Ronan Railway was also absorbed. They were allowed to stay as an industrial branch right serving Mitten Industries. The only difference was that any engine under the North Western Railway's ownership could traverse the rails. This spelt doom for Marie, for she had grown weak, and with the arrival of bigger engines that could take the munitions trains such as Edward and Henry, she was deemed obsolete by her management and was sold off to the highest bidder. Her current whereabouts were unknown. In 1950, Manol Packard officially left the company and established his own construction firm, Packard's Construction Company, and bought 2 engines, Manol and Vulcan, alongside several different vehicles. Ulfstead Mining Company contacted A.W. Dry & Company to build embankments across the flats north and south of the River Els, and they created a line from the wharf outside Elsbridge, which has recently been restored as part of the North Western Railway's overhaul, curved past the mines at Torrywhack and bypassed the Fenlands to reach Knapford. This was known as the Elsbridge and Knapford Railway. This harbour was incredibly disappointing because it kept needing to be drained, which was getting incredibly costly. So, in 1905, they simply abandoned it and extended the railway alongside Tidmouth. Because of both the length and the new use of the coastline, horses were deemed unsuitable, and A.W. Dry's young engineer, Topham Hatt, was asked to build light locomotives. This was his forte, and he built 4 coffee pot locomotives: Excelsa, Liberica, Robusta, and Arabica, each named after strands of coffee. Excelsa was the brains of the bunch, always thinking logically around each situation. Because of this, she was often made fun of by the trucks as they found her to be a smart spout. Because of this, she became the manager's private engine, lugging a little coach around. Liberica, on the other hand, was a favourite of the trucks. She was gentle and kind to them, and they always requested to work with her. Robusta was more focused on speed and playing around, often wanting to race the other coffee pots at a grand 4 miles per hour. Excelsa would often warn her to not go too fast, but she never learned. Finally, Arabica was incredibly shy. She didn't like to see the workmen, and when the workmen needed to come up and down the line, she hurried away from them. This made her seem very, very selfish. In 1908, a storm demolished the coastal span and destroyed the tracks alongside wiping away Arabica. Though she was found washed up on the beach a few weeks later and was put back into service. Because of this, a tunnel was bored through Tidmouth and was completed 2 years later. An expansion was also part of this project, leading directly to Elsbridge, and the railway was officially renamed the Tidmouth and Elsbridge Light Railway. In 1912, it was amalgamated with the Wellsworth and Suddery Railway, with Topham Hatt retaining his position, and then joined the Sodor and Mainland Railway into becoming the North Western Railway. They soon established a branch line from Elsbridge to Farquhar with an attached tram rig up to the Knowslip quarry. The coffee pots were now considered redundant and they were each sold away. Excelsa was sold to the Kirk Ronan repair yard, where they used her excellent mind of forward death thinking. Liberica was gifted to the Knowslip Quarry Company as part of the extension, and she's been quite the treat from what I've heard. Robusta was sold off to A.W. Dry and Company before they scrapped her for parts. Arabica was sold to a private owner, and allegedly runs from the East Anglia region with a small tramway, taking a coach from the wetlands with her. In 1870, a short industrial line was built between Crosby and Suddery, with a small station, Wellsworth, placed in the middle. By 1885, there were 4 little engines working this line: a set of twins, Wendy and Locke, a tank-turned tender engine, and Theo, a thrown-together experimental design which was given on the cheap. Wendy was an eager-to-work people-pleaser, often going out of her way to accommodate others. However, this did sometimes lead to other engines such as Locke manipulating her a little bit. Locke was very arrogant, as he felt that being the only tender engine offered him a good amount of prestige over the others. His goods duties were often loud and rowdy, as he wanted as many people to see him as possible. While the other engines had a uniform green livery with yellow lining, he wanted to stand out, so he chose to have red lining instead. Theo, on the other hand, was very, very quiet and timid. Locke picked on him a lot, and his self-confidence was very low because of this, though management could recognise that his talents didn't lie with taking trains but with shunting, and also understanding mechanical behaviours that no one else could make sense of. As the years passed, there was soon passenger demand, so short services down the railway were created, mainly spearheaded by Wendy. However, their vision never strayed from the industrial intentions. While they originally intended to create a harbour at Suddery, it was deemed impossible to do so due to Suddery Castle's blown up masonry, so they moved to Brendam in 1904. Past Brendam, you can find china clay pits, which were worked by the line's 5th engine, Victor. They were the main moneymaker for the railway, and Victor took immense pride in this. In 1905, they finished building the jetties at Brendam, and the fishermen were greatly appreciative. But the idea of expanding into a fully fledged port was unsuccessful in execution, so the plan was abandoned only 4 years later. So they turned their attention elsewhere, and began to talk for an agreement with the Tidmouth and Elsbridge Light Railway, which would let them use Tidmouth's port, and they finalised an agreement which caused Crosby Tunnel to be bored. They did pitch the idea of joining into one big railway, but that was shot down in favour of 1914's merger into the North Western Railway. One of the first things done by the North Western Railway was to put money into investing in the idea of a port at Brendam, and in 1923 they had finished constructing Brendam Docks. This did come with a price. Brendam Docks came with the possibility of importing higher quality China clay, and Victor felt incredibly stressed by the idea of becoming obsolete. So he worked harder and harder, but that only spelt doom for him. He allegedly overlooked a few safety procedures one night, and he misplaced blasting explosives and caused a terrible accident. The resulting disaster made the railway board sure that it was time for the China clay pits to close, and Victor was sold off. For the other engines, well, Wendy was bought by Brendam's shipping company to shunt at the docks, but they sold her one day to a private owner, and her current whereabouts are unknown. Was absorbed into the North Western Railway's fleet as general goods engine. You can sometimes see him rush past of any odd job that needs doing, though he doesn't say much anymore. Block was offered to countless different buyers, but nobody wanted him, so the Suddery Railway Board decided the best course of action was to use him for parts. The most useful he'd been to anyone in years. Theo, on the other hand, was immediately scouted by the Crovan Skate workshop, and they bought him for a desperate price, where he works to his best capability. This railway serviced a small mining complex, and were bringing minerals down past the Rochester coastline. This line had a small roster of engines. Number 1 was the gleaming tank engine Candle Queen, who always took charge and saw herself as a favourite of the public. Number 2, Abel, came in to help once the workload at the mines became too much to handle. However, he didn't stay in the spotlight for too long, which we'll get to in just a moment. The third engine was quite the oddity. He was modelled after the Stephenson's rocket, and believed he was Stephenson's rocket, and nobody bothered to correct him. It states that he was built to bring publicity to small passenger trains. The fourth and final engine was a small boxy engine by the name of Samson, who was the actual engine in charge of the entire mine operation, but of course he was overshadowed by Candle Queen. There are records of other little mining engines owned by the mines, but we don't have those anymore. Now, why did this railway close? In 1894, Candle Queen and Abel were working hard in the mines, but Samson had fallen ill the night before. Abel was tasked with showing a very important visitor around, the manager's wife to be specific, and she was riding in his cab. Abel allegedly misjudged his timing, and didn't brake until the last moment, which resulted in him crashing straight through the mine shaft. He wasn't stopped by the initial impact and fell further and further down the mine, with very important passengers trapped inside. There was no saving them. The mine shaft of the railway not long after ceased operations after this incident. Candle Queen was given to the Kirk Ronan Industrial Railway to handle the fuel deliveries, which she continued to do once the railway was absorbed by the North Western Railway, just on an island-wide scale. Stephen was sold to a private buyer, who takes him out on joyrides around England and Wales, sometimes even bringing him to Sodor to surprise the passengers. Samson, however, seems to have been struck from the record completely. There are no records of him being sold, though no records of him being stored away. Its current whereabouts seems to be unknown. With the recently approved plans to rebuild the Wetlands branch line, one can only hope that this line's many secrets will come to light, one way or another. I see. If only they'd known.